Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow on this planet, right, dealing with all the things that we deal with every day in an unrelenting fashion, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the truly horrifying murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Dossier. If you've been here a while, you would know that Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents, but at a fraction of the luxury price point, where most luxury perfumes can cost anywhere from $50 to hundreds of dollars. Dossier's perfumes range anywhere from $29 to $49, and they have lots of different ways that you can save money. Like they offer bulk deals with up to 25% off, and they also offer free shipping on 3 or more bottles, which is a deal that sounds too good to be true, but I promise it is not. All right, today I have these 2 scents to feature for you. They're both from the Dossier Originals line, which means they're not inspired by any existing scents. They are ones that were created originally for Dossier, hence Dossier Originals. So today I have a theme in the scents that I picked out, not in the scent profiles, but in the names. And what I mean by that is this is Slice of Heaven, and this is Orange Glow. You get orange slice. This is more of an ambery gourmand, and this is a fruity floral. And you know what? This is the first one I've tried from their Color Factory collection, and I know that orange is like a fruit as well, but this really does smell like the color orange, but in a hot way. What are you doing? You want to smell? Sure. This is Slice of Heaven. Do you like it? Yeah. Yeah? It smells so pretty. Now, a nice smelling perfume is arguably like the most important selling point when it comes to buying a fragrance, right? To picking a fragrance. But for me, one of the big factors is that Dossier is a cruelty-free fragrance brand. And a lot of fragrance brands just simply are not. A lot of luxury brands across the board just simply are not. So if you love animals as much as I do, this could be a good fit for you. And again, they are a fraction of the price, which a low price point is also a big selling point for me. Anyways, with all that said, Dossier is offering members of the Brat Pack 10% off of their order for a limited time with the code BRATTERSTEIN at checkout. I really can't imagine that you're going to find a better deal out there. So if this sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link at the top of my description box to let them know I'm the one that sent you and get 10% off your new favorite perfume or candle or room diffuser today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. All right, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I had never heard about before, but had been suggested to me a couple of times through the comments. You know, you guys, let me know what you want to see. This was referred to me by someone named Karen Charuski. I hope I said that right. And also Whitney. So hi, you guys, thank you for your suggestion. And wow, this case is so fucked up. Obviously, all murder is fucked up, right? But when kids are killed, right? And when kids are the ones killing other kids and kids are the ones orchestrating the murder of other kids, which is the situation in this case, it's even more messed up and even harder to like wrap your brain around how these types of things happen. At least that's the situation for me. This case is very upsetting. This case truly, okay, so I watched a lot of interviews, as I do when I'm researching a case, and seeing the interviews with Seth's parents was enough to destroy me. It broke my heart. It made me almost cry, which I've gotten to a point now where I can, separate as much as one can. And usually I can stop myself from becoming physically emotional, like crying, for example. But this one, hearing his parents, talk about their son, and just knowing that they have to know what happened to their son. Like all the information I'm going to give you today, they know that that's what their child's last moments were like. And that's just horrifying and just enough to destroy you. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all of the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I actually have 2. I'm going to give them to you now so you can have them bouncing around in your brain while I'm giving you all the information, but then we're going to revisit it at the end. And these are the questions I want the answers to. 1. Who do you think was the mastermind who actually orchestrated the murder of Seth Jackson? And 2, do you believe the sentences that his killers were given were justice? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below once we go through this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the horrifying murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Now, our story takes place in a place called Summerfield, Florida. This is an unincorporated community in Marion County, which is smacked right in the middle of the state of Florida. And it was actually referred to as a village. And it is a small community, small town vibes, with a post office that's literally been in operation since 1885. Like, that's how small town the vibes do be vibing. It was here that at 9:30 p.m. on April 17, 2011, a man named Steven was standing outside of his home smoking a cigarette when he witnessed what he believed was just a little scuffle, a fight between teenage boys. He says that he saw one boy run out of a peach-colored trailer, followed by 2 or 3 more teenage boys who were yelling, "Get him." He said that the first boy made it to the road where he was tackled by one of the boys who were chasing him. He says that he then saw these boys pick up the other boy and carry him back into the house, and that that's all he saw. I personally think that's debatable because once we hear what actually happened, I feel like it'd be pretty impossible that he didn't know more was going on, but we're going to get into that. But either way, this is what he witnessed, and he did nothing. He didn't call the police, he didn't report it, he just like, well, boys will be boys, and went about his business. And this would turn out to be a grave mistake because the boy who was running from this house was 15-year-old Seth Jackson. And when he was brought back into that house, he was murdered by a group of people, one of which was his ex-girlfriend, and another which he supposedly loved, his ex-girlfriend that he was said to have loved as much as a 15-year-old can love somebody in a romantic way, you know what I mean? And another person in that group was somebody who had been his friend. But before we get into what happened to Seth that night and the details of his murder, which are horrible, I'm going to tell you now, I first want to talk about who Seth was and how we got to this place. Seth Tyler Jackson was born February 3rd, 1996, and he grew up in Bellevue, Florida. And this was a place that was a very religious community. It was a very small town. It was a place that like the older people went to, kind of like a more Florida retirement. It's a place that people went that wanted the quiet, but it was a place that, you know, the teenagers who lived in the area, because there were, you know, a handful of them there, were often finding themselves very bored, which I feel like a lot of people could relate to this, especially if you're, like me, from a little dust bowl of a town where everything worth doing is about an hour away. Now, Bellevue, for reference, was just about 10 minutes from Summerfield, which is where our story takes place. Where the murder takes place is in Summerfield. He grew up in Bellevue, 10 minutes difference. 10 minutes of a difference. Seth was raised in a trailer park with his parents, Scott and Sonia, and his 2 brothers, Scott Jr. and Stevie. All the S's. Scott Sr., Sonia, Scott Jr., Stevie, Seth. I actually love that. Scott grew up very smart. He did very well in school, but on top of that, he was very well liked. He was friends with most of the local kids in the area, you know, that small group of kids that were around. He was friends with most of them, and he was always out with them, running, riding bikes, playing, skateboarding, being, you know, a little boy. He would play with all the kids and build things out of sticks and play football and play video games and try to jump these ramps that were made for the bikes, you know what I mean? Like little ramps that you jump on bikes. And I guess the ramps that were made previously were too big because he was like a smaller kid. So they made additional ramps just for him, which I thought was really, really adorable because, you know, he was obviously well liked if people go out of their way to make additional ramps for him to ride when he was little. And he also loved things like paintball. Seth's family said that he was just a very typical teenager. He loved his family. He loved his friends. He loved going four-wheeling with his family. He was a hard worker, and his mother said that his only fault was loving animals too much to the point that maybe he brought home one too many animals, and she's like, bro, we have too many animals. And he was said to be the type of person who extended that love of animals also to his family and friends. So he had a ton of people who loved him and cared about him throughout his life. He was always the jokester of the group. He loved making people laugh. He also had plans and dreams for his life. Like he was 15, you know what I mean? So he had plans and dreams as much as any 15-year-old did, and he was happy and friendly as much as any 15-year-old was. But his dreams for his life at this point were that he wanted to be an ultimate fighting champion. And he planned on making this dream a reality when he turned 18, and he was going to start taking classes. Like that's what he wanted. He was a handsome, popular, charismatic sophomore in high school who, in addition to being well liked by most of his friends, was also pretty well liked by the ladies. He was said to be like a cute little boy, which he was. He was an adorable little boy, and that all the little girls were all about him, and like he could have his pick. But in 2010, he had his eyes set on one particular girl, and this was Amber Wright. So Seth and Amber started dating at the end of 2010, and when Seth first brought her home, when she first started coming around, his parents didn't really think much of her one way or the other. They didn't like her, they didn't dislike her. Seth was said to be the type of boy who kind of had a new girlfriend every other week, so they just didn't take it especially seriously. It wasn't anything noteworthy to them. She was just another girl, but she started to come around a bit while they were together. In their time together, she would come over. She would spend time with him, with his family. She'd have dinner with his family. She'd hang out on their couch. She'd watch TV. She'd play basketball. So they got to be around her quite a bit. And they said at first they liked her. They thought she was very typical, a typical teenage girl. But his mother and father did say that the longer that they were together and the more she was there, they noticed that she was sort of manipulative. So that's what his parents would see when they were together. You know, basketball, watching TV, eating dinner, pure. Except it wasn't pure, because we're here. Well, not necessarily. This next behavior wouldn't necessarily lead to where we're going to end up today, but it is part of the story, so I'm going to tell you. So, when the two were dating, and they were together alone, when they weren't under the watchful eyes of adults, they would get into a little bit of partying. But it wasn't, to me, typical partying. Maybe it was to some people. Because I would say that at 15, 16, I was a little fun, a little bit of a party animal myself. But they were doing things that perhaps that I would not have done at that age. Like they would hang out, they would drink, they would smoke weed, which yes, I definitely did those things. Not saying you should if you're 15. I'm saying that I did do as I say, not as I do, and I'm saying don't do that. But they would also dabble in things that were a little harder. They would, you know, try cocaine here and there. They were having the sex. I wasn't doing those things at 15. And they also just like were kind of toxic with one another. They would do everything they could to make each other jealous as much as they could, and it was just kind of an unhealthy relationship. Anyways, as I said, the relationship started at the end of 2010, and it lasted a short 3 months because, you know, they're young, they're in high school. These things don't tend to last. Not that they never do, but they don't tend to last. And after the breakup, things got a bit inimdeal. It was said to be a nasty breakup. Seth said that Amber, and it was generally believed that Amber had been unfaithful to him, but Amber denied this. I think she's since admitted to it, but at the time she denied this and said that it was actually Seth who cheated on her. But either way, it was like a nasty breakup, and they started being really unkind to each other in the wake of the separation. And they would say some really nasty and mean things to each other, particularly on social media, and it just wasn't a good look. And I guess it was a lot of pain is what was causing this, which obviously, you know, when kids are hurt, they lash out in anger. And Seth's parents said that when him and Amber broke up, he was actually pretty devastated by it and needed like consolement by his parents to get over it. So here they are processing their pain and their big feelings through anger, as teenagers oftentimes do, and they're taking out a lot of their frustrations, as I said, on social media, Facebook to be exact. And it's one of those things where like, you have that separation. You can say things that you would not normally say, and a situation can escalate in a way it normally wouldn't through social media, where you don't have to be accountable for the things you say. It very much reminds me, not very much, but in some ways, the fighting aspect reminds me of the case that I covered, it's probably like 2 months ago now when you're watching this, but Rachel Wade and Sarah Ludman, which actually that case also happened in Florida. Weird. If you haven't seen that video, I probably won't remember to link it, but you can search it on my channel. It is a really sad case, but anyways, as it progressed, they were getting nastier and nastier on Facebook with each other, saying mean things, calling each other things that, you know, they shouldn't be calling each other. Both sides, they were not being very nice to each other, but that do be how it do be going sometimes. And they both continuously say like, you know, I'm done, I'm done, you know how they do, but they were never done. They kept going about it. And I think what escalated the situation a little bit and made them fight even more is that, you remember how I said that it was thought that Amber was not faithful. Well, it turns out that she wasn't. This was true. She had been unfaithful. She had cheated on Seth. And this was with an 18-year-old man named Michael Barco, a man who now, 15, she's too young for you, bro. And she was now like sort of dating him. So Seth could see this thrown in his face, and this was just adding fuel to the fire, making him more upset, which made them fight, which made her, you know, they're trying to make each other jealous. She said herself, they're just trying to make each other jealous. And so it just added fuel to the fire that they already had. Now, Michael Barco. He was a friend or more to Amber, and also Amber's older half-brother, Kyle. Michael had only lived in the area a few years. He had moved to Florida to live with his grandparents, and I believe his father, like he moved to live with his family. And I'm not sure if his prior record is why he was sent to Florida, but he had gotten into some trouble and had a record, and at least one of the charges had been for violence. So he moves into town. He meets Kyle. He meets Amber. They start hanging out. They start becoming friends, and they go on to then introduce them to another friend of theirs that they have. This is an 18-year-old girl named Charlie Ely. Now, Charlie was living in a trailer, a peach-colored trailer, in a more remote area. And she was living there alone now because she had previously lived in Maryland and had met a guy online named Joseph and moved to Florida to be with him. The two got married pretty young, and shortly thereafter, he was arrested. So now she's just living there, totally by herself and existing totally on her own because she wasn't from the area. It's not like she had friends. She moved here and then he just like was gone. So she's just by herself. And I tell you this because Michael ended up moving in with Charlie and a few other roommates that she had. There was one couple who lived there that eventually moved out, like shortly after Michael moved in, they moved out. And then she had another roommate there, a 20-year-old man named Justin Soto. Now you may have connected by now that this trailer, this peach-colored trailer that Charlie lived in and all these people ended up living in, was where Seth would eventually be killed. But prior to that night, prior to that bullshit fucked up night, this was just a place where these local teens would hang out. Like it was Charlie's place, so Charlie lived there. She had Justin who lived there with her. It was just a roommate. I don't believe there was anything romantic there, but he lived there. Then there was Kyle, Amber's older half-brother. I don't think he lived there, but he was there a lot. And then we had Michael Bargo, who was living there, and we had Amber, Seth's ex-girlfriend, who was there all the time because she was friends with all of the people who lived there, and it was just like what they did. If you know, you know. I think you know. Okay. So anyways, back to the breakup. They're really being mean to each other. It seems to everyone that Michael and Amber are dating. Though I will say, just so that you know, Michael has denied it. He said, like straight up on the stand, he's like, no, we were not dating. Like he was questioned on this because I think they were trying to push that he would have done what he did. Spoiler alert. I don't think it's a spoiler. I think it's obvious that he would have done what he did because he was Amber's new boyfriend, but he said that they weren't dating. And Amber has come out since, like she did an interview while she was in jail, like 5 years after she got arrested. She said that they weren't really dating, that they had hung out a lot and they had sex a couple of times, but that the only reason she was even with him and like having sex with him was to make Seth jealous. But I don't know. I kind of feel like they were dating, and they did, like, both of them tattooed the other's initials, like, in the bikini area. So do with that what you will. I don't know. Maybe if you're just banging somebody and you're bored and you're 15, you get tattoos. And if you're 18, because he was 18, you get tattoos of somebody's initials that you're not dating. Not a choice I would make, but there's a lot of choices that are made in the story that I would not have made. Either way, whether they were dating or not, I don't know. But one thing we do know for sure is that they were spending a lot of time together. They were definitely buds, if not more. So they're spending a lot of time together. So he's hearing all about the ongoing fight between Amber and Seth. And I mean, they are posting it publicly on Facebook, so anyone with eyes that's like friends with them can see the way they're being to each other. And he doesn't like that because for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, but no matter what the relationship was, he did care about Amber. So he's seeing this and he's not liking this. He's hearing this from her and he's not liking this. And on top of this, apparently Amber told Michael, and she also told this to her older half-brother Kyle, who we're going to talk about more later. She told them that Seth had also been physically abusive to her. Now, is this true? I do not know. I didn't see it reported anywhere that it was true. I didn't see it confirmed anywhere that it was true. How they could really prove that, I don't know. So was this real, or was this something that Amber was saying out of anger? I'm not sure. But either way, this is what she's saying. She tells Michael this, and she tells her half-brother this. So this definitely did not help in what? Basically, Michael did not like Seth at all after hearing this. But let's be real, he probably didn't like Seth that much to begin with because of the fact that Seth was the ex of Michael's new sexual friend. Friends with benefits, if you want to call him that. So he probably already didn't like him. And I get the impression that it wouldn't have taken a lot for Michael to like get enraged and dislike somebody. And based on what we know about him and what he goes on to do, I think it's safe to say that he wasn't like a super level-headed dude who would take any information that would piss him off well, if you know what I mean. So now let's revisit Kyle a little bit because I said I would talk about him more, and now I shall. We'll get into it now. So Kyle Hooper was Amber's 16-year-old older half-brother. And now Kyle had an issue with Seth because Amber told her that Seth had hit her. And on top of that, Kyle is friends with Michael. And you know how quick these things can boil over. Like, I'm friends with you. No. Yeah, I'm friends with you and you don't like this guy, so I don't like this guy. Blah, 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 blah. You know, kids. Now, the situation with Kyle was kind of complicated because Kyle and Seth had been friends. They had been buddies. Like, Kyle had been over to Seth's house, spent time with his family and all of that. But now Kyle is conflicted and he's angry. And then, as if the anger that I already said wasn't enough, like the being friends with Michael and thinking that Seth hit his sister, blah, 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 blah. Apparently, Kyle had a crush on this girl. I think her name was Melissa. I don't think they were dating, but he had a crush on her. No, they weren't dating, but he had a crush on her. And Kyle caught Seth and Melissa in bed together. And this really, really pissed him off. He was already mad He sees this, he's even more mad, and apparently after this, he texted this girl and told her that he was going to kill Seth. So now we have these two men, Michael and Kyle, who both care a great deal about Amber and are now fuming and pissed and angry because they believe that Seth had hit Amber, when it's very possible that this wasn't even true. So now the tension is there. Michael and Kyle don't like Seth. Seth doesn't like Michael and Kyle. And they're doing the whole shit talking on each other, walking by, saying stupid shit, posting things online. And I guess they actually at one point get in a fight. Seth and Michael do get into a fight. Mind you, this is an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old, so that's illegal. Well, maybe it's not in that state. I don't really know. But, like, that's not fair, right? A 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. But, Shyamalan twist, they get in their fight. 15-year-old Seth lays out 18-year-old Michael, which I think bruised his ego quite a bit to be beat up by who he would consider, like, a kid, because he was a child. But, yeah, Seth won this fight. And now Michael is feeling demasculated. Is it emasculated or demasculated? I'm going to go with demasculated. He's feeling like less of a man. Okay? And he felt like it would make him, an 18-year-old, not look good to be beaten up by a 15-year-old. Or at least he thought that people would think he didn't look good for that. You know what I mean? Yes. I know you do, because you're smart. And the thing is, I get the impression, like any guy, not any guy, a lot of guys would have issues with their manliness after something like that. I do believe that that's true, especially at that age. But I get the impression with Michael specifically from everything that I read and things that I read about him, that he had a specific issue with his masculinity, just based on things that people said about him. The way people talked about Michael led me there. Like, okay, for example, once it came out that Michael was involved with the murder of Seth, people who knew Michael were actually shocked to hear this and to hear that he was involved at all, because he was seen as kind of a pansy. Like, literally, I saw an interview with a family friend who said that Michael was referred to as, quote, daddy's little princess, end quote, because he was a wimp. And I get the impression that this is sort of why he talked big and why he had all this rage and why he, like, portrayed himself as, like, this dominant, tough guy, and why he was known to carry a gun. This was a gun that he wasn't shy to show off, to wave around, to shoot at things willy-nilly. And in one of the instances that Seth and Michael, like, got in a fight, got into a little scuffle, they were, going at it or talking shit. It wasn't clear on if they were actually physically fighting. I'm going to guess not, though, based on what I'm going to say next. But in one of these situations where they were having a tense conversation, Michael said to Seth, "I've got a bullet with your name on it." And Seth's own mother heard him say this, but of course she didn't take this seriously, because, like, teenagers do be teenaging and they do fight and they say things like that, which I see some people sometimes when I watch true crime where they're like, oh, I would never say anything like that. Like, that's a flag. Which in this situation, perhaps it is a red flag because of the fact that he does go on to murder Seth. But I will say that teenagers fighting and saying, "I'm gonna kill you," to me isn't immediately a red flag, because teenagers are stupid and say stupid things. But anyway. Now, speaking of this gun, because I forgot to mention this and I feel like I'm gonna forget it again if I don't say it now. So you remember how I said that Michael had moved in with Charlie, and that when Michael moved in with Charlie, she had 2 other roommates that moved out. Well, this was a couple. And apparently the reason they moved out is because the girl in the couple, who was pregnant, by the way, her and Michael got into an altercation, and he pulled his gun on a pregnant woman. The same gun that he would later use to kill Seth. So this is why they were like, "I'ma fucking go, because I don't feel safe here," and they moved out. Now, what exact moment was, like, that thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back and really pushed these people over to wanting to kill Seth? I'm not sure. Like, what made Amber or Michael or Kyle really want Seth to no longer exist, to be murdered? I can't say for sure. There are a lot of things that it could have been. It could have been Michael and Seth's fight where Seth actually beat up Michael. I could see that being something. It could also have been, like, a couple of weeks before the murders. Apparently, Kyle and Michael invited Seth and his friend over for a fight, and they didn't show up, and this pissed them off. Which, side note, there was an interview with his friend, and I guess they did try to show up. They went to actually fight them, because, like, they didn't just talk about it, they beat about it. But when they were walking up to the house, they started hearing gunshots, and they were like, "Oh, absolutely not," and dipped. But whatever it was that caused them to finally start taking steps towards doing this, it was Michael who brought it up first, who was said to have brought it up first. Michael wanted to kill Seth, and he knew that Kyle had been super pissed off at Seth as well. So he went to Kyle and was like, hey, I want to kill Seth. And Kyle was down. Then they went to their other roommate, Justin, who I don't even believe had a real connection with Seth. And they told him, and he was down. And then Michael went to Amber and was like, listen, I'm going to murder your ex-boyfriend, and I need you to be the bait. I need you to contact him and tell him that you want to get back together with him. Do whatever you need to do to get him here. And she was just like, absolutely, I will. So the plan was for Amber to contact Seth to get him to come to the house so that they could talk about them. So the plan was set in motion. Amber would invite Seth over to Charlie's house where Michael, Kyle, and Justin would be waiting to ambush him. Their plan was to beat him within an inch of his life, but not to kill him from the beating, because Michael wanted Seth to be alive when he shot him to death. He wanted him to be alive and conscious when he shot him. So Seth knew it was Michael who was killing him. And that is so fucking evil. How do people think of that? So the night came where this plan was going to be put into motion, and on this night, it was a totally normal night for Seth. He was at a friend's house with another friend. It was like a group of 3 people, I think, and they were just hanging out when all of a sudden Seth got a text to his phone, and this was from Amber. And it was a text that was a lot sweeter than the text he'd been getting recently, since they had been so shitty to each other. And in this text, she was basically like, can you come over? I want to hang out with you. I want to see if we can work on us. I just want to see what we can do to be together again. And I guess he immediately, and this is what's so heartbreaking, is he immediately was suspicious. He didn't buy what she was selling. He didn't pick up what she was putting down. And he texted her back and he was like, Amber, if this is a trap, if you are luring me to get jumped, just know I will never talk to you again. So if that's the situation, just say goodbye right now. And she was like, oh, no, baby, I would never do that to you. So he's skeptical, and his friends that he's with are skeptical too. They don't buy it, and they tell him not to go. They convince him, like, hey, don't go. So he doesn't. He does not go right away. Him and his friend continue hanging out there for a little bit before they leave. And then his friend goes towards his home, and Seth starts heading towards Charlie's. So he gets to the peach-colored trailer. And this trailer, by the way, was in a remote area, right? It is down a long one-way dirt road just out there. Like, I'm not going to say there were no neighbors, because obviously a neighbor saw this, but this was a less populated area. So he gets there and he sees that Amber and Charlie are standing out front waiting for him, and they stand out there and talk for a bit, hang out and chat, likely keeping warm next to the large bonfire that was already burning out front. They then all go inside together, and initially the plan was that as soon as Seth walked in the house, Justin Soto was supposed to take the first blow. He was supposed to hit Seth in the head with a wooden axe handle and get the show on the road. But when Seth entered the house, Justin had cold feet and he did not do it. So Seth just walks right in and he goes into the living room and he sits on a chair and he's just hanging out when Kyle's like, okay, I'll get it started. And he charges Seth, who's just sitting in a chair with an axe in his hand, and cracks him on the head with this axe handle. And as he ran out, Michael was right on his heels. And as soon as this happened, the girls got up and they took off, they scattered, they ran, and they hid in Charlie's room. It all happened very fast. Now, as soon as Michael enters the room after Seth has already been hit in the head with a wooden axe handle, right? This child is just hit while he's in a chair. Michael enters the room and just opens fire on him. He literally shoots this 15-year-old while he's sitting in a chair and can do nothing to defend himself. Somehow, luckily, Seth was conscious and aware of what was happening. He was conscious and aware enough to, even after getting cracked in the head and getting shot, to get up and make a run for it. And somehow he manages to get out of the front door of the trailer. He runs across the lawn. He runs to the road. This is what that neighbor saw before he is tackled to the ground by Justin, a 20-year-old man. So Michael catches up to where Justin and Seth are, and when he walks up to them, he shoots Seth again while he's on the ground. And this is before the 3 guys start beating the crap out of this 15-year-old child while he's shot laying on the ground, dude. And I guess at first it was just Justin and Michael who were beating him, and Kyle was like standing on the sidelines, but then Michael was like, what are you doing? Get in on this. And so he starts beating him too. And this is what that neighbor saw. This neighbor saw this shot, bleeding child run to the street. He sees these 3 dudes chase him, tackle him, start beating him, and drag him back into the house. And he says that's all he saw. But Michael also shot him. Did he not see that? Did he not hear the shot? I have trouble believing that. I just gotta be honest, I have trouble believing that. When this man was asked, like, why didn't you call the police? He said that he was from New Jersey, and then said, and I quote, "Where I'm from, to me, it's just a normal beatdown." So now, after being beaten and shot multiple times, Seth was picked up by these three men and brought back into the house, where he was put into the bathtub, I guess because they thought it would contain the mess. And once in the bathtub, Michael Bargo rained down hell on this child. He yelled at him, he beat on him, he shot him more times, and through all of this, Seth was alive. Seth was killed by the final blow, which was a shot to his face. This is a 15-year-old kid. Now that already sounds like a lot, right? But he wasn't even done. Apparently Michael wanted to stuff Seth in a sleeping bag. Like, that was the plan, but he wouldn't fit. So he then went on to break his kneecaps with a hammer so that he could jam him into this sleeping bag. And then these kids take him outside into the front yard and put his body in that already burning fire pit. And then this is the part that just like all of it's like, what? But they go on to spend the rest of the night partying and celebrating around this fire pit like it's just a bonfire, like they're just kids hanging out, like there's not a child whose body is burning in that fire pit. Like, imagine even just like the, I don't want to be disgusting, but like the smell. And they're just hanging out, partying, listening to music, drinking, smoking weed. And then Kyle, eventually, as a party does, people start to go inside and go to sleep. Kyle sits outside till 2:30 in the morning, making sure that the fire continues burning. Michael and Amber just go inside and go to bed together. This fire burnt all night, dude. Like, a neighbor across the street from the home said that when he left for work around 6 a.m. the following morning, so this would have been the 18th, he noticed that this fire was still burning and that there were two boys sitting beside it. And apparently a neighbor came over, and I didn't see if this was the same neighbor, but a neighbor came over concerned about the size of the fire and the duration of its burning. So they knock on the door, and I guess Charlie's the one who answered the door, and she acted totally casual, totally fine. I think she was described as bubbly. It was just like, oh, Joey, her husband, is in jail, and I had some friends over for a bonfire. Now, the morning after the murder, there are still some remains of Seth in the fire pit that need to be dealt with. But don't worry, these kids had somebody else to help them with this task. This was a 37-year-old man named James Haven. He was a butcher at a local grocery shop, and he actually just happened to be Amber and Kyle's stepfather. 37 years old. Oh my fucking God. Apparently, James had been in on this plan. Why? I'll never understand. He knew about it. When I say he's in on it, I mean he knew about it and did nothing about it. I guess the day before the murders, he had been at the house hanging out with these kids. Why? I don't know. They're too young to be your friends, but he was there hanging out with these kids, listening to them plan the murder of a child, and did nothing about it. And then after it was done that night, I think it was Michael who texted him and was like, hey, the deed is done. So this guy is, fuck this guy. So he headed over to that house that morning to help them take care of disposing of this child's body. But before they could do so, Michael picked up the skull, which still had teeth attached to it, and he pulled the teeth out with pliers to make sure that it would help in, making it difficult for police to identify Seth's body. Now, I did also read, different reports on how this happened. I also read that he did this before the fire was set, which is even more disgusting, really. I'm not sure exactly which one was true. I believe it's more likely that he did it after, but honestly, I just don't know. Now, this man, this James, should have been the voice of reason, right? Like, he's the adult. Well, I mean, a couple of them are adults, but he's the adultiest of the adults. He's 37 years old, hanging out with kids, which he shouldn't be doing. And you hear this. You hear these kids, who two of which are your stepchildren, by the way. You hear them talking about murdering a child, and you're not immediately like, yeah, no, you're not going to fucking do that. Instead, you know about it. You talk to them about it. You get texted when it's done, and you show up the next day to help them get rid of the body. What the fuck, James? Anyways, he shows up with cinder blocks and cables in tow. Instead of being the voice of reason, he's like, here's some cinder blocks and some cables, and also I will transport you to dispose of this body. So the group takes shovels and they shovel what's left of Seth's remains into these large paint buckets, 3 large paint buckets. They then take them and load them into the back of this truck. And then it's him, James, Michael, and Justin who drive to this lime rock quarry. I never heard of this before, but apparently it's a thing. It was a lime rock quarry that was like filled with water. And they proceed to take these buckets and throw them over the edge of a cliff into this body of water. And apparently one of the buckets came open while it was thrown, and Seth's remains got scattered all over the cliffside on the way down. So they're doing that. And in the meantime, Kyle, Amber, and Charlie are back at the trailer cleaning the shit out of it, doing everything they can to destroy all the evidence, you know, going over the house with bleach, doing all the things one would do to hide the fact that a murder had been committed there just the night before. And then once they were done, Kyle just left and went off to work just like it was a normal day. He's like, I gotta go to work, so see you guys later. So when Seth didn't come home that night, immediately his mother knew something was horribly wrong. Not just because he didn't come home, but because he didn't call her. She said that he was the type of kid who would call her without fail. Even if he had to go out and find a payphone, he would let his mom know what was going on. So she knew in her gut that something was, she was one of those parents who seemed like she could tell that her son was gone. That's the impression I got. But because she was so worried, she went and reported her son missing, and this would have been on April 18th. So the same day that they are throwing his body into a lime pit. I say his body, but you know, his remains into a lime pit. It's so sad too, because you remember I said that Seth had been with his friend the night before? Well, this was his friend William. And William heard about Seth being missing and was really, really worried about him. So he went out that day and just started looking for him everywhere. And I guess in his searches, he ended up at Charlie's trailer because he knew that like Amber had said he wanted to see, you know, he knew what was going on. So he went over there and all he saw was a burnt up fire pit and a bunch of paint dumped out onto the ground. Now, the news of Seth's disappearance was quickly on the local news. So everyone in the area, including his murderers, knew that he was considered missing and police were looking for him. So Michael sort of tries to get away to distance himself from the crime, but he doesn't go far. He actually just goes to the house of another girlfriend. So even if he was with Amber, he wasn't being faithful to her. And this other girl's name was Kristen. And he confesses to her what he's done. Then they leave her house and they go to her father's house for some reason. I assume it was because he was running, but it wasn't completely clear. And once there, he admits to Kristen's family that he's in trouble and tells her father, her father's girlfriend, and her son, his father's girlfriend's son, what he's done. But I don't think he ever admitted that it was Seth. He just told them that he had killed somebody who had hurt his family. I just don't know how you hear that and don't I don't know. So as I stated, the story of Seth's disappearance was being broadcast by the media. It was all over the news. And just 2 days after Seth went missing, Kyle was sitting on the couch watching TV with his mother when a report of Seth's disappearance came on the news. And I feel like this guy must have been being eaten alive with guilt. Because just stuff that I'll tell you later, he does seem to be remorseful and seems to have trouble with what he did, unlike some of the people involved. And so he's watching TV with his mom, and it gets the best of him. And he looks at her and he's like, Seth's not missing. He's dead, and I saw him die. And in response, his mom does exactly what we hope everyone would do. And she calls the cops. The cops come over and they're kind of talking to him. And they realize that he is really emotional and would likely be giving them more information. So they decide they want to make this more official and go downtown. So they rally up the troops. They get Kyle, they get Amber, they get Charlie, and they get Justin because, you know, Michael's gone. And they go to the police station, all 4 kids. I guess, you know, Justin's not a kid, but all 4 of them, and neither is Charlie for that matter, but either way, all 4 of them are in the car with a police officer, and Amber and Kyle's mother is following behind them. And once they got to the police station, the kids were separated so that they could be interviewed. Now, all of their stories were kind of similar at first. It's kind of like they talked about what they would say, in my opinion. It seems like they talked about what they would say beforehand, but as they continued being questioned, their stories started to change. In her interview, Charlie claims that Seth showed up unannounced wanting to speak to Amber. She said that at the time the boys were in their rooms and that they just all of a sudden came out and jumped him when they saw him. The girl said they had no idea it was going to happen and they were scared, so they ran into Charlie's room and locked themselves in her bathroom when all of a sudden they started hearing gunshots through the door. Charlie said that after that, Michael had actually come into the room and told them that they better not say anything, and if they did, there would be 2 additional bodies to go alongside Seth. She then said, like, once it was brought to her attention that they knew that Amber had lured him and that they knew that Charlie, had helped get him into the house, she then broke down and was like, well, yes, but I had no idea they were going to kill him. I thought they were just going to beat him up. I didn't know it was going to go this far, and I only did it because Michael threatened me with a gun. Now, Amber tells police sort of the same thing. She tells police that, Seth showed up unannounced and uninvited, even though it wouldn't be hard for police to prove that that wasn't true, but that's what she went with initially. And she said that all of a sudden, her brother Kyle went out and hit Seth first, and that her and Charlie were just terrified, so they ran in the room and they hid. She says that they ran in the room and they hid, and that they heard gunshots on the other side of the door, and even though they heard that, they just proceeded to go to bed, where they slept all night, and which, by the way, he was said to have gotten there at like 9:30, so they went to bed, okay, right around this time, and then slept till 11 or 12 the next day, not getting up at all after hearing all those gunshots, just slept like little babies, and when they woke up the next morning, the whole house just smelled like bleach. Now to Kyle. Kyle, as I said, did seem like he was the most remorseful of the group. He is the one who came out to his mom and told her he was involved in the first place. He definitely minimized his involvement to his mother. He didn't tell her just how involved he or Amber were, which this poor woman, like, that's both of her kids. It's really sad. But he did tell the truth to police. He told police everything that happened. He tells them about his involvement and the involvement of others. And when Amber is presented with this, like, that her brother had told them basically everything, she cracked and confessed her involvement as well. Now, there is something about her confession, because I'm telling you, she confessed. There is something about her confession that issue was taken with, but that is something we're going to get into a little bit later. After interrogating Kyle, Amber, and Charlie separately, police decided it would be a good idea to put them all together in a room. And of course, this room had a camera, but kids do be kidding and they don't be thinking. So they started to say some incriminating things. Like, for example, Kyle said to them, like, oh, we didn't kill an innocent kid because he wasn't innocent. And I guess they said this because, like, their reasoning behind this, I believe, is because Kyle was like, well, he hit my sister, for one, and he also threatened to burn my house down and kill me and my family in it. Is that true? Did Seth say that? I don't know. It's possible. As I said, kids do say dumb shit, but most of the time when kids are saying stupid stuff like this, it's all talk. Right? It's not something they're actually going to do. And it definitely doesn't justify murdering this kid in such a brutal way and then setting his body on fire. Like, him just saying that doesn't justify that action. That's what I'll say. In addition to Kyle saying what he did while in that interrogation room, Amber was also like, do you know how many people are going to hate us? And Kyle was like, why? Like, why would they hate us? And she was like, because a 15-year-old kid is murdered. And one thing I did notice when I was watching this because I watched this footage, obviously. And one thing that I noticed is that, to me, Amber seemed like she was trying to push a narrative. It was almost like she was saying out loud to others what they should say happened. Like she was telling a story. She was telling the story of what happened out loud and kind of saying, like, oh, Michael's to blame. Michael made all this happen. And to me, it sounded like she wasn't just saying it out loud, but she was saying it out loud so that Charlie and Kyle would hear it, so that they would know what they needed to say. But that's just the opinion I got by the way that she talked. But I'm also, I could be influenced by the fact that people do think that she was the mastermind, but that is how I felt when I was watching it. Anyways, after some time, an officer did enter the room and she informed the kids, like, hey, you're going to be arrested and you're being charged with first-degree premeditated murder. And their response to this really did show how, like, young they were, and, like, how young they were, because they were like, what? Like, what are you talking about? We didn't even do anything, da, 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 da. And she's like, listen, don't give me that. That's bullshit. You were all, like, completely complicit, so you're gonna go to jail. Like, I don't know what you were thinking. And then the officer leaves the room, and Amber, her lack of self-awareness is amazing to me. She was 15. Doesn't excuse it, but her lack of self-awareness, she was like, oh, man, I'm not going to get out of jail till I'm 20. She thinks she's going to get 5 years for first-degree premeditated murder. My God. Now, when these kids were first caught and it came out that it was them that were responsible for Seth's murder, his mom, man, this poor woman was so broken and she was mad. You could see it. And she was like, you know what? I want all of them to die. I want all of them to get the electric chair, and I want to sit by and watch them fry the way they did with my son. And I was like, I feel it. I get it. I always get it. I always feel like that's how I would feel if I was in this sort of situation. Especially now that I have a son, like, quite disrespectfully, fuck them kids. Now, I believe it was the same day that they were arrested that, you know, officers went to that lime rock quarry to try to recover Seth's remains. Divers went down and they found the 3 buckets, 2 of which had been tied down with cinder blocks, so they were weighted down to the bottom, and one had rose to the surface and was kind of bobbing around like a cauliflower. And I guess that one of them, again, had opened, so a lot of his remains had spilled out into the water, so they had to go through the water and recover those remains. And then what's wild about this is, you remember I said it opened when they threw it over, so there was a bunch of stuff like thrown, scattered across the cliffside. Well, they literally had to recover all of this. They can't just leave it, so they had to like put ropes and scale the wall, like recovering all of the evidence and all of Seth's remains. And another thing that's wild to me is that somehow a medical examiner can look at remains that are this badly destroyed and still tell what happened. Like, after being burned and thrown into water, the medical examiner was still able to look at the remains and determine a cause and manner of death. They said the cause of death was gunshot wounds and blunt force trauma, and the manner of death was homicide. Which, I mean, to me that's kind of the homicide part, because like he was in buckets and burned and all that, but you know, they have a job that they have to do, and this is part of it. When people found out what happened to Seth, they were heartbroken, dude. A funeral was held for Seth at the First Baptist Church, and a bunch of his friends showed up, and they wore t-shirts that had Seth's face on the front and then the local area code 352 on the back. And one of his friends even went as far as shaving R.I.P. Seth into the side of their head. The pastor during his funeral told the guests, like, listen, you got to do what you can. You have to do the best you can to think about who Seth was, what was good about him, what made you love him, and try not to think about what just happened to him. Last Sunday, like, they had the funeral right after he was found, so I can't even imagine. I know you have to do that. And I've actually been to a funeral right after a murder of a teenager, actually. Now, to think about it, like, they do have them right after, but it's so raw, right? When, you know, it's sad. Shortly after Seth was murdered, a little tribute was made for him, and it was made near the trailer where he was killed. There was like a telephone pole out front, and at the base of the telephone pole, there was like pictures and balloons and, you know, all the things that you normally leave for someone after they're gone, candles. There were also notes and letters that were left for the murderers that said things like, how could you do this? And you need to rot in hell. On the front door of the trailer, there was a white sign that read, quote, feel free to grieve, but out of respect to the boy, please do not enter this house. Which is crazy to me that that needs to be said, but you know, people suck. And a neighbor also came by and put no trespassing signs up at the crime scene after the tape had been removed, like the crime scene tape. Anyways, back to the investigation. So they have Amber, they have Kyle, they have Justin, and they have Charlie in custody. So now they just need Michael, but again, he had run. He wasn't good at running, though, because they ended up catching him pretty quickly. They found him an hour and a half away at that girlfriend's house, like hiding out. They brought him, they arrested him, and unlike his friends, he immediately asked for an attorney. So after arresting Michael, they search his room at Charlie's. You know, that trailer's already being searched, actually. They're searching it top to bottom. Like, it all happened so fast, I'm like, after this, but it was all kind of happening at the same time. So they're searching this trailer top to bottom. They find a gun and bullets hidden in the floorboards. They do the luminol test, and that home lit up like a fucking Christmas tree, dude. There was blood everywhere. It was on the walls. It was on the ceilings, obviously the floor. It was in several rooms. They tested the DNA, and they found mixtures of Seth's DNA mixed with freaking DNA from like all of the people who took part in killing him. Like, it was there's a lot there. And they also searched Michael's grandma's house, which is where he was supposed to be living. Like, he was, you know what I mean, because he moved to Florida to live with her. And there they also found a gun and a shell casing. And then in addition to, you know, the evidence that they found in those places, they also had what was left in the fire pits and what they had found at the lime rock quarry in those buckets. Like, they had a lot of evidence in this case. Now, Michael, of course, tries to deny being involved, but the problem with him is that he just runs his mouth, bro. Like, he was one of those talkers. Not only did he admit to, like, his girlfriend's family, once he was arrested, he started telling everybody in prison about it. He started telling his jail mates, his cellmates, things like that. And one of these prisoners went to police and told them what he said. They were like, I don't know this guy, and he's giving me this information, so I'm giving you this information. He's just bragging. He's bragging about it. So everyone is arrested by this point. Like, I didn't even mention that James was also arrested. Everybody's arrested by this point. And mostly everybody has separate trials. Like, Michael has his own trial. Charlie has her own trial. Amber and Kyle have a joint trial. James Haven, Amber and Kyle's stepfather, has his own trial. And then Justin doesn't even end up having a trial. But let's get into all that real quick. And by real quick, let me kind of get into it in depth with you real quick. Let's start with Justin's situation, since his was, the most uneventful of the group. He was arrested and he was held without bond, and he was being charged with first-degree premeditated murder. And he was put on suicide watch too, which I don't know if that's common for everyone to get put on suicide watch, but I feel like I read about that happening a lot, and that happened with him as well. He was in jail, and they hadn't decided, the prosecution had not decided if they were gonna go after the death penalty, but they were definitely considering it. And Justin seemed to want to preemptively make sure that did not happen to him. And so he took a plea deal, like right off the bat, where he would plead guilty to first-degree premeditated murder as long as they never put the death penalty on the table for him. So it was just like an overall easy process for him, right? He went in, he pled guilty, he was sentenced to life in prison, and when he was sentenced, he didn't really have much of a reaction. He was kind of stoic and quiet, didn't react. And his attorney, though, seems to have really grown a connection with Justin, seemed to have bonded with him while representing him, because his attorney came out after and said that he felt like he cared very, very much for Justin. He said very, very, two varies. That he cared very, very much for Justin, and that he was just as sorry that this had happened as Justin was. Because he says that Justin is very remorseful, very sorry, and has never tried to deny his involvement. And that it's just unfortunate that this situation happened the way it did. So now let's discuss James. Stupid, fucking pitiful James. I'm sorry, something about James Havens just pisses me off. Not more than the others, but in a different way, because they all had an obligation, but he had an obligation to be better. So he goes to trial, and it's determined that not only did he help dispose of the remains of a 15-year-old murdered child, but he also helped Michael Bargo run from police. So, bing, bang, boom. He was found guilty, and he was given 30 years. So bye. And when I say he was found guilty, I mean he pled guilty to being an accessory to murder and was given 30 years. Now moving on to Charlie. Charlie did have a trial, and during her trial, she basically said that she wasn't as involved as the prosecution was trying to make her out to be. But Charlie's attorney didn't do much to help her, didn't do much in the ways of proving that she wasn't involved. So she did ultimately end up being found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and given life in prison with no possibility of parole. Now, Seth's family was stoked about this. Seth's mom spoke to the court during her trial saying, and I quote, "Some say your life is over, but you will still see and talk to your family. You will still get letters and birthday cards. You will still laugh and cry." Now, Charlie did end up appealing her decision. Her decision? Not her decision. She did end up appealing her sentencing. That's the word I was looking for. And obviously she was doing this on the grounds of ineffective counsel because, as I said, he didn't do much in the ways of helping her. And because her last attorney was ineffective, she ended up hiring a new attorney for this appeal. And this attorney is somebody that you may know of, somebody who's a little bit famous. His name is Jose Baez, Stephanie Harlow's favorite attorney. But this was Casey Anthony's attorney, Jose Baez. Basically, Jose Baez argued that Charlie's former attorney had made several critical mistakes that made it impossible for her to get a fair trial. Basically, the case against her was weak, but at trial, the prosecution played the interrogation tapes in court, where Charlie had essentially repeated things that she had been told by police that the other defendants were saying. So they weren't her own words, but these words were sort of being fed to her. And her attorney didn't object to these things being admitted when he could have and should have, and it might have made let's be real, it probably would have made the difference for her. Now, I don't know about her attorney. I don't know how incompetent he was. I did see that he was suspended from practicing law in 2018. So that's something, but he was reached out to and asked how he felt about the fact that Charlie was getting a new sentence, and he said he was for it. He said that he felt like she didn't deserve as harsh of a punishment as she had gotten. So Charlie's appeal ended up being successful, which meant she was going to get a second chance at a trial. And this time around, she decided to take a plea deal. And she's actually lucky that she got a plea deal, to be honest, because I read that the prosecution was really against plea deals, especially for the other defendants. because of how gruesome and heinous the murder was. But she did take a plea deal where she pled to a lesser charge of second-degree murder. Like, she pled guilty to second-degree murder. And in exchange, she got a 10-year sentence. But by the time she got this sentence, she had already served over 9 years in prison and had gotten credit for the time she spent in county jail as well. So she was released shortly after this hearing, and she was just ordered to, like, she would have probation and she'd have to pay restitution to Seth's family. Jose Baez said in response to her being released that it was a bittersweet day because though they were happy she was being released, she was an innocent person who had to plead guilty and that the evidence had proven that she was innocent. And then he said, and I quote, "This case is a perfect example of be careful who you hang around with. Charlie was mixed up with the wrong group of people. Her crime was being present at the scene. She is just a victim of being present. She had no role in the murder, no role in the cleanup, no role whatsoever. No role in this whatsoever, excuse me." Which, here's the thing. I don't know what I think when it comes to Charlie. I do think it's possible that she wasn't as in on it as everyone else, but it was her house, and I do think she knew it was going to happen. I do think she knew it was going to happen. I don't think she thought they were just going to beat him up. Like, I just don't. So I don't know. And then something that really made me mad is that Jose Baez added that Charlie was just another victim, which, like, no, Seth is the only real victim here. But I don't know. I know that his family was not happy about this, and their opinions matter the most. So that's that on that. But she's out. She's doing her life, doing her thing. I don't know where. I didn't look that part up. Where? Now let's move on to Kyle. So Kyle had a trial, and he had a joint trial with his sister, his stepsister, his half-sister, his sister Amber. And Kyle did seem to be sorry for what he did. I don't know why the word sorry just escaped me so hard, but sorry for what he did. Like, when they were describing what had happened to Seth, he could not even lift his head. Like, it was something that he could not deal with. But despite this, I mean, he was still guilty, and he was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and he was given life in prison without parole. Now, he did end up getting a new trial because of that whole, like, it being deemed unconstitutional for minor. It was deemed unconstitutional for minors to get an automatic life sentence with no possibility for parole. But basically, he could still get a life sentence. It just wouldn't happen automatically. It would only be given to, quote, "the rarest of children, those whose crimes reflect irreparable corruption," end quote. So he got his new trial, and he was again found guilty of premeditated first-degree murder, and he was given life in prison, but this time it would be up for review, up for parole in 25 years. His mother was present, and she said that she was disappointed, but she was not surprised by the outcome. Honestly, even though he is remorseful, I'm not surprised either, because there just wasn't a lot that could redeem him for what he did, you know? It was said that the crime was premeditated, sophisticated, cold, calculated, and heinous, and the judge had a huge issue with Kyle's motivation to do what he did. Just because Seth was in bed with a girl that he had a crush on and believed that Seth had hit his sister, that being enough for him to plan and deliberately go through with something like this, delivering the first blow and dragging a shot Seth back into the house, like, these things are concerning and you cannot look past them. He did those things. At his trial, it was also very powerful to hear Seth's mother Sonia, talk about how destroyed she is without her son, how lost she is without her son, and that she can't even see a child riding by her on a bicycle without breaking down because she doesn't have her baby. Now, even though Kyle was given life in prison, the judge does believe that Kyle can be rehabilitated. Like, Kyle is the one defendant in this case that gave the judge hope. I mean, he was the one to come forward in the first place, I guess. And since being in prison, he's, you know, been remorseful and found God, as, you know, they always do, and he is up for parole in 25 years. And I didn't mention this, but Kyle did take the stand. He did take the stand himself and say how sorry he was, and by that time he actually had Seth's name tattooed on his arm as a daily reminder for what he did, what he was capable of doing. And he said that Seth didn't deserve to die like that, and if he could, he would do whatever he could to go back and change it, but he knows that he can't, and that he might as well have laid down and died with Seth. Now, let's talk about Michael, and then finish with Amber. Finish strong with Amber. So, Michael. Now, Michael goes to trial and denies any involvement. He had nothing to do with it. Well, no, that's not true. He denied having anything to do with the murder, but said that he was there and helped with the disposal after the fact. He said the night of the murders, he was not even at that house anymore. He says that Kyle had stolen his gun from him, a gun that he says was only even at that house because they had a rat problem, so he would shoot at the rats. So he says that Kyle took his gun, and that then Kyle and Justin beat him up, which was his way of explaining how his face was messed up, because what actually happened, and they already determined what happened, is that one of the paint cans that was in the fire blew up in his face, and that's how his face got messed up during the bonfire where they burned Seth. That's what happened, but he said that Kyle and Justin beat him up, and so that he just left, and that they must have killed Seth while he was gone on his walk, his angry walk. He was mad that he had gotten beat up, so he left. He comes back to the house, finds out what they had done, and told them he was gonna call the police, but they said if he did, they would just pin the whole thing on him. This is his story. He said specifically of this, and I quote, "I was actually scared for my life, beat up, drunk, and I cannot do anything about it. Like I might be the next one in the fire pit." He just seemed to kind of be a whiny guy, to be honest. He claimed that he was being treated poorly in prison and saying that the inmates and correction officers were bullying him and abusing him, and spitting in his food and reading his letters he'd written to loved ones out loud. He also said guards allowed him to be beaten up. And I don't know, maybe it's true. Maybe they didn't like the fact that he was breaking the rules because he had like made a shank out of glasses lenses. And maybe they didn't like you because you murdered a child. Maybe that's it. But also I don't believe that they were being as mean to him as he said, because even his own attorney said that like he wasn't being treated that poorly in prison. Coming from your own attorney, that's saying something. Anyways, there's a ton of evidence against Michael already, and the fact that he ran his mouth really didn't help him much. They actually brought that girlfriend, Kristen, like to court, and she testified that he had called her saying that he wanted to stay with her, saying that he needed somewhere to go, and that when he got there, he had admitted to her what he did, that he had told her that he had gotten into a fight with a kid that went bad, and he ended up shooting him to death. And he also admitted to the burning, the dismembering, everything that he did. The prosecutor said of Michael, and I quote, "He hated Seth Jackson. He wanted him dead, so he killed him." The prosecutor added, quote, "He wanted Seth alive in that bathtub, so when Seth took his last breath, the last thing he would see is the defendant standing over him, shooting him in the face. Justice in this case is a recommendation that the defendant, Michael Bargo, be sentenced to death." His attorney at this point must have just admitted defeat, because his attorney was kind of like, listen, like, he's a bad guy, yeah, he came from a bad family, he did some bad things, but what you really should do for him is give him life in prison so that he can die in prison, essentially, after living, like, a full life. Like, he's like, what am I going to do here? Just don't kill him. Please just don't kill him. So the jury was not feeling what Michael was spitting. They were not catching what he was throwing. They were not picking up what he was putting down. So they went in to deliberate, and after just 6 hours, they came back and they had found him guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder. And the majority of the jurors had said that, like, recommended that he get the death penalty. I believe it was 10-2, said yes, put him to death. And so ultimately, the judge sentenced Michael Bargo to death, and he was the youngest prisoner on death row. Now, that should be over, but of course it's not. Michael ended up getting resentenced because the Florida Supreme Court deemed that if a jury is not unanimous in their recommendation for the death sentence, you cannot be given the death penalty. Basically, they're like, everyone has to agree or he doesn't go to death. And his jury was not unanimous, so he got resentenced. And this was very upsetting for people who love Seth. This was very upsetting for his family. There was like a petition was created called Justice for Seth Tyler Jackson. And basically the purpose of the petition was to show the court that the people in Seth's life did not want this man to get out, did not want him to not be put to death. They didn't want a chance of him not being behind bars. And what's really sad about this petition, actually, is they only got 62 out of the 1,000 signatures that they were hoping for. And that made me really sad. I know that now, like, it doesn't matter what we do, like, because we're done. The story's done. We'll get there. But it just made me sad that more people didn't sign that. But, you know. Anyways, during his new trial, his attorneys also brought into question the fact that Michael was only 18 at the time he committed the murder and therefore didn't have a fully developed brain. They also noted that he had had frontal lobe damage from a head injury that he had gotten when he was younger, which we do see a lot in people with poor impulse control, and they also discussed various mental health issues he had struggled with over the years, even having a school guidance counselor, or whatever they're called, recommend that he should be hospitalized to get his mental health under control. A doctor did testify to the fact that Michael grew up in a toxic upbringing, and that due to this he didn't learn good social skills, so that combined with him hanging out with the defendants and them kind of egging each other on was like a volcano. But a friend of the family disagreed with this, saying that he didn't have like a toxic upbringing and that his parents were good people. She said that people would believe, based on what he was saying and what the courts were saying, that his parents were like animals, but that wasn't the case, that he had a nice, loving family. And then the prosecution was like, okay, everything you're saying, that's great, that's cool. But his sister grew up in the same household and this didn't happen. So the math's not mathin'. What's up, bro? Like, how are you going to say that this household caused Michael to control and plan the murder of a 15-year-old, but his sister's over here just doing just fine? Like, make it make sense to me. But it didn't, right? Right. Anyways, all of this was in vain All of this was in vain because in 2019, a new jury unanimously gave him the death penalty. So he is on death row. He is the youngest man, as far as I know, still the youngest man on death row. And he still does not take any responsibility for his actions. And he says that if the state of Florida kills him, they will be murdering an innocent man. And Seth's mom was present when this happened. And as soon as the, verdict and the sentencing was read, she just left the courtroom quietly. So now Amber, the girl that many, many, many people believe was the mastermind behind Seth Jackson being murdered in the first place. Her whole case was hinged on the principal theory, which means that someone who helps a murder be committed is just as guilty as the person actually committing the murder. And to prove this, the person must have conscious intent for the crime to occur and must do something to, quote, incite, cause, encourage, assist, or advise another person in committing the crime. Does that make sense? Yeah. Her attorney was like, where is the evidence that she wanted him dead? And the prosecution was like, hold my beer, and then played the interview footage. The interview footage from when she was brought in, when she was arrested and interrogated, right? And she had, quote, venom in her voice when she talked about what happened, and venom in her voice when she responded to police after they implied that all of this happened just because she was mad at Seth. In these clips, she said, quote, he hit me. He almost gave me an STD. He cheated on me. He turned my friends against me. Which was really just her listing off a list of reasons why she would want him dead. Yeah. They also talked, the prosecution also talked about just how planned this was. How well planned it was, even though it was sloppy, it was still planned. The kids had planned it, and even James testified that he heard them planning it. So, like the others, Amber was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, and she was given life in prison without parole because she was too young to be eligible for the death penalty at 15. And I do think that if she had been old enough, or if it was legally allowed, they would have gone after it. I got that impression, listening to interviews from the, prosecution and things like that. Sounds like they wanted to go after the death penalty for her, but they couldn't. And even the judge said that this was the most heinous murder that they had ever seen while on the bench in the 15 years that they had been practicing. Now, Amber did appeal, but Amber appealed on the grounds that her Miranda rights were violated in her first trial. Now, basically what happened is, you remember how I told you that when she gave her confession, there was an issue with it, and we were going to come back to that later? Well, we're back to that now. So basically what happened is that when Amber confessed to the murder, she had not been read her Miranda rights. So she does her confession, the officer's like, this is great, love it, cool. Walks out and is like, oh shit, we need that. So they go back in. They Mirandize her then. They re-interview and they get her to confess again. And basically her appeal was that shouldn't have been able to happen. And it was determined that yes, that shouldn't have been able to happen. That confession shouldn't have been used at trial. So she got a new trial. But all this was in vain because she had a new trial and was again found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. But this time she was given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The judge, this was her second judge, was taken aback and said that in the 5 years they had been a judge, because this judge had been a judge for 5 years as opposed to 15 like the last judge, they had never given a life sentence. And now they had to do it for this young girl. And the judge then added, and I quote, I have not seen or heard anything more despicable than what led to Seth Jackson's death. I cannot imagine a circumstance any worse, And I pray to my God that the reason behind all this is some chemical imbalance or a brain that hasn't matured. It's really hard to deal with the notion that such evil could exist without an explanation. Amber showed no reaction whatsoever to her new sentence. Her mother, however, was devastated and went out in the hallway and just cried hysterically. And dude, when I read that and I think about Amber and Kyle's mother, it's really heartbreaking because she lost both of her kids and James all in one fell swoop. People are so stupid. They do the stupidest things, and now she's left without any of them. And she said that she will still go and visit her kids in prison, for as long as she can, because what else is she going to do? At least she gets that. I mean, that's more than Seth's parents get, which, speaking of Seth's parents, before leaving the courtroom, Sonia, Seth's mother, spoke to Amber directly, and she said to Amber, and I quote, "Amber, we hope that guilt eats you inside and out, knowing that you caused all this. You fed into Bargo's deranged desires with your lies. All this happened because of you. All because of you. All because of her. Sonia and Scott do not have their son." And I know I mentioned Sonia a couple of times, Seth's mother a couple of times, and I didn't really mention his father throughout this video. And it's not because his father's not around. His father is there. His father, though, seems like the type of man, we've talked about this sometimes, that's just fuming. He has said that Amber should have gotten the death penalty, that she's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry that she got caught. And he said that the only way that he can deal with what's happened, deal with what happened to his son, with the knowledge of what they did and that they're out there and alive. And just, I can't imagine knowing all the things that I told you they know. You know what I mean? And the fact that they know that, he says that the only way he can deal with it is that he has to push it down. Because if he did what he wanted to do, he'd get in trouble. Because what he wants to do is a big no-no by society standards. He says that he's doing the best he can. He says that he hasn't blown up on anybody or ended up in jail. So that's a win. And that he feels really sorry for whoever brings everything he's pushing down to the surface again one day. When asked about Amber, he said, and this is a quote, that he wanted to, quote, kill the bitch. And then he added that no, he wanted to torture her. That he wanted to torture all of them. And he would make sure it took a very long time and would lose no sleep over it. So I get why he's saying that society would find what he wants to do a no-no. Because you can't do that. But I also get it, you know what I mean? I understand him feeling that way. I'm always amazed at people who don't feel that way, because I'm like, how? How are you so strong? I could never do it. So I understand, as much as I can without being in his position, that rage and that mindset. Now, his mother seems more level-headed. I know in the beginning I said that she wanted them to fry in an electric chair and for her to watch, but since then she seems to, as the years have gone by, she seems more level. She has said that she feels conflicted because she's lost her son, but she's also a mother. So she sees the people who killed her son as kids, but that at the same time she wants to scream into the void. She has also said that she actually feels bad for Amber and Kyle's mom because she lost her kids too, which is big of her. And she said that she hopes that one day she can forgive Amber. She says that she thinks that it's possible. And her husband was sitting next to her in this interview, and his reaction, bro, to her saying that was priceless. But that's where she is at, that she hopes that one day she can, but that today is not that day. She says she doesn't forgive Amber yet. She doesn't think there's anything Amber could say or do that would make her feel even any better. And this is when Seth's father chimes in and says that he can think of one thing that would make him feel a little bit better, and that would be for her to die. And with that statement, that, my friends, is the story of the horrendous murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I gave you all the details you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering Seth with me today. Now, considering everything I've told you, now that you have all of this information, I want to revisit the questions of the day, and that were these. 1. Who do you believe was the mastermind behind the murder of Seth Jackson? Do you believe it was Michael? Do you believe it was Amber? And 2, do you believe the sentences that they were given for his murder were justice? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Before you click out of this video, please don't forget to leave me a suggestion down below of what cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As this case indicates, if you leave a suggestion, I do try to look into it. I love looking into the cases that you guys suggest because they're usually cases that I'm not familiar with or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below along with a link to my membership where you can get early access to non-sponsored videos, occasional live streams, things like that. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.